Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm thrilled today to welcome AJ Sherman to the podcast to talk about The Owl and the Pussycat, starring Barbra Streisand and George Segal, released 50 years ago on November 3rd, 1970. How are we doing, AJ?
I'm doing very well, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to
No.
start by just asking you, what kind of role have movies played in your life? And
Oh,
if you have a
huge.
couple of favorites, I'd love for you to share them with us.
Oh, yeah. Movies have played a huge role in my life. Actually, I live out here on the East Coast, in the New York City metropolitan area. And growing up, my first movie I ever went to was at Douglaston Plaza, which is right off the LIE in Queens. And it's a total like ghost town shell of a sad, once awesome shopping center. My dad took me to see Stargate there in the early 90s.
Okay.
And that was definitely my foray into action adventure genre. Since then, I would say probably, bless you, probably the top three movies I love are Big Lebowski, E.T., and Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
That kind of sums me up pretty good.
Mhm.
I've been to a couple fan events for the Big Lebowski where you like go watch it outside with like a whole bunch of other Lebowski nuts. Empire Strikes Back is clearly the best Star Wars. I'll fight anybody on that. And E.T. is just a really awesome kick-ass Spielberg film, and it's definitely one of my favorite, explorations of his genre. And it has awesome trivia behind it that once I learned and kind of like read up into it, like early Spielberg is like some of the best, like it could be a movie in and of itself, and E.T. definitely was a turning point in his career where after Close Encounters and seeing what Universal was doing with the Jaws franchise, he went and decided he was going to make a sequel to Close Encounters and was making Raiders of the Lost Ark with George Lucas. And he's writing this like book about, which is more about like a alien, night or series of nights in Indiana with this house, and they're terrorizing this house, and there's like a lead alien and there's like a cute little kid alien. And he gives this script to Harrison Ford, and Harrison Ford shares this with his then girlfriend at the time, Martha Matheson. She reads it and reads about the story with the cute alien and the autistic son of the family. And she's like, oh, this is a great movie in and of itself. And he goes off and writes that. At that same time, he produces a little film called Poltergeist, which is a lot about a family being tortured by things that come in the night. And then a couple of years later, Joe Dante makes Gremlins, which is inspired by, these little aliens that show up cute and then get nasty as they go on. And it's so cool to me that like one Spielberg idea spawned like three icons of pop culture. And to me, that's like, E.T.'s the ringleader in the center of the pack.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, you know your movies very well.
I do. I just did a whole podcast, or my podcast is about Long Lost Heroes podcast. I'll plug it. We do like movie reviews and different we did Marvel stuff. We also did TV. We did Mandalorian. We did Watchmen. And this summer, as we were about to get into quarantine, we decided to take our hack at James Bond. And we just finished last night our final James Bond episode. So I can now say I've seen every single Eon Productions James Bond film.
Except for No Time to Die.
Except, we're not, well, yes, but that's a whole podcast in and of itself, right? Like
when is it coming out?
And then it could be bought by the streamers. Like the idea that James Bond could come out on a small screen, like that just like irks with my conscience. Like it's not right. I'll go see Black Widow on a TV. I'll watch Mulan on a TV, but I don't know if I'm going to watch Bond for the first time on a TV.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's supposed to come out in April. I would be so bummed if it went to Netflix or something. Like it needs to be in the theater.
No, I agree with you. And it was supposed to come out in April. We, kind of hedged our bets because they were thinking about actually moving it up only a couple of weeks in the start of the coronavirus. So we're like, let's do the Craigs, let's do the Brosnans, we'll do that, and then we'll catch up. And then when it got the big push to November, we recalibrated our whole thing, and we were actually like really succinct with the release date. And then a couple of weeks ago when they said it's going to get pushed again, we were just like, no.
Yeah, you knew it was coming.
It had to.
It's funny you mentioned Stargate because 1994, that was like a big movie going year for me too. That was the first year I saw an R-rated movie in the theater. True Lies
Oh
with
yeah.
Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis, and Speed was so great that summer. So yeah, 94. Stargate was a little bit after that. I think that came out in September. Uh, but it was like that was a big year for me as well for
It was
movies.
cool how the 90s had these like seminal years.
Hmm.
94, even some would say I guess 95, but like 99 is like a
Oh yeah.
huge year in movie history, you know. And it's so crazy to see the films that were like on the cusp of the movie making we still see now, and the movie making that we watched die in the early part of the 2000s, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I just finished a book all about the year of 1999. Someone wrote like a 300-page book about why that year was so important in cinema. Um, so what about the 1970s? What are your, and you know, any films of that decade that you like or that you
Oh,
revisited?
of
I mean,
course.
obviously you
Yeah.
mentioned Spielberg would be
I
one.
mean, yeah, again, my bar mitzvah theme was Spielberg, so like I've got some credit on the subject. I think Close Encounters is awesome.
Hmm.
I watch it every couple of years. But there's other 70s films that I've seen that I really liked. Taxi Driver comes to mind instantaneously. You know, I've seen Rocky Horror in a theater a couple of times. You know, the 70s is a kind of a cool era. It's got a big, wide, spanning reach of different genres and styles, you know.
Hmm.
I also like how, you know, the auteur theory is coming in at that time, and you're starting to see, yeah, I guess what are other 70s movies that I really like? Mean Streets is love fucking
Yeah,
Mean Streets, man.
everything Scorsese that decade was
Yeah,
pretty great.
yeah, that was. But even that, the shot where De Niro comes into the bar and the Rolling Stone song comes on, like that's one of the best shots ever. I don't know. I guess not a total ton. It's kind of a crazy decade for me, I guess, because like it's, you know, I was born in '89, so like I guess I feel
Okay.
some connection to the '80s, but the '70s just always felt like a lot of stuff going on that I got like the snippets of, you know.
Yeah, and that's partly why I'm doing this podcast is I love movies of the 1970s, but I haven't seen a whole lot of the films outside of like, you know, the big ones, right? So it's
Yeah,
been kind
for
of a
sure.
cool project to find some hidden gems I might, you know, not have seen otherwise. But so yeah, that takes us to our film today, The Owl and the Pussycat, which is a
Yeah.
film I had not really heard of. I mean, obviously familiar with the work of Streisand and Segal and great you know, credits, but you know, the director and the writer. It's written by Buck Henry, who wrote The Graduate, and it's directed who directed it, Herbert Ross, who would go on to do The Goodbye Girl and
Oh,
Footloose and Steel Magnolias and some really, you know, popular films. This was
Ken
his
Adam,
second film.
production designer
Ken
from James
Adam.
Bond. Ken Adam
Yes.
is the man. He kills it in this. He really gets New York City. It was
Yeah.
awesome to see him do it.
Yeah. So I'm just going to do a quick little rundown of what the plot summary is for our listeners who might not be aware of the film. And then I've just got like 5 or 6 little pieces of trivia. If you have anything to, you know, anything to add here, you can feel free to chime in. So
Sweet.
it's a romantic comedy. Streisand plays kind of like a reluctant prostitute hooker in this movie. Her name is Doris. And then
Mhm.
Segal is a struggling novelist named Felix who works like as a clerk at Doubleday. They live in the same building, apartment complex kind of a place, where they've had a strained relationship from the start. His loud typing bothers her. Her complaints about the typing bothers him. And then they eventually meet when he complains about her being a prostitute. Right, it gets her
Yep.
evicted from her room, which leads to like this wild night together where they end up both being evicted from the building. So they have to go stay at like his friend's house, his friend's place. And basically they just have very opposite personalities. But what happens? Can we guess? Do they start to, you know, become attracted to one another? I was very shocked by this development. And basically, in the second half of the film, try not to give away too many spoilers of like the third acts of the films we're talking about.
Sure.
Their relationship takes many twists and turns along the way. They like each other, they hate each other, they like each other. It's one of those kind of, you know, screwball romantic comedy kind of concepts. Anything else you want to add to the storyline? I mean, there were some other characters in the movie, but I felt like it was basically a two-person movie for the most part.
It's definitely a two-hander. So I think in the trivia and in my reading about it, you can see that this was originally a play, right?
Yes.
And this definitely feels very much like a play set in a movie, with the act structure, but also with the way that it feels very intimate and personal to watch their relationship kind of carry on and the repartee between them. Yeah, you hit it pretty much nail on the head. If we're not going to do any spoilers, that's like pretty perfect, man. You killed it.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about most of the plot events. I just try not to. I try to avoid like the last 20-ish minutes, unless it's like
no, I feel you.
Unless it's The Godfather or something. When I talk about The
a
Godfather,
lot happens in the last 20 minutes of this movie, though.
That's true. Yeah. But like the last scene outside, maybe just avoid like talking about what happens.
Oh yeah,
with them.
Course.
Even though this isn't, this movie is not doing anything completely unexpected, right? They both don't die of suicide at the end or anything like that.
No, that is definitely true. But I like the twisties in this movie and the way that it unfurls. And it definitely has some nice beats in there where you are building that intrigue of like what's actually going on. And I think for me, like the main takeaway of this movie is like people are interested in a really simple story. You know what I mean? And if you can kind of serve it with some really nice, exciting, spicy varieties, like you can make this, seemingly, run of the mill tired story new again. It's kind of cool the way the timelessness of a rom-com can kind of be reinvented over many, many times.
Yeah, it's a genre that's been around from the beginning, right? I mean, you going back to the 30s, and there's the romantic comedy has had a lot of staying power. I feel like every decade we get a few really good ones. I don't know if the 70s is really known as the decade of the romantic comedy. I mean, Annie Hall is kind of a romantic comedy. But there's not a lot that come to mind, right? As like being, like really, really funny films about relationships. I was thinking about that this morning. I was like, how many romantic comedies from
the romantic comedies for me is like an 80s decade. Yeah. There's like a ton of really great ones that come out of that. And then the 2000s, again, kind of a resurgence,
Yeah, absolutely. Not so much in the last 5 years. I feel like we haven't had as many in the last few years.
Well, it's hard to, they'll readapt, they'll figure it out. Technology's changed the way people meet and have romantic intertanglements anymore. It tried. Remember when there were the competing Friends with Benefits movies? There was the
no strings attached. One. No Strings Attached with Portman and Kutcher. And then that was in like January, and then in July we had Friends with Benefits with Timberlake, right? And Mila Kunis. So yeah, that's been going on forever too. We're in the same year. You get two of the same movie. Like you're like, what?
They haven't done that in a while. I really liked there was that new rom-com that came out in the beginning of quarantine. The Lovebirds with Kumail Nanjiani.
Oh yeah. I haven't seen that yet.
That's a fire movie, man.
I heard it's great. Yeah, it's on my list.
Oh, it's great, and it's definitely fun. I guess like the word of the day in film recently is subversion, so it definitely like subverts your expectations of what you're going to see, but still slam dunk. And Always Be My Maybe is another great one.
Yes, I saw that. Year. That was really fun. That's right. Yeah, that was really fun. I'm a little concerned about upcoming romantic comedies. Are we going to get a lot of COVID romantic comedies?
There'll be at least 5 next year. I promise you. They're writing them right now.
They're writing them.
Oh, they're writing them right now, and there's some in development. Probably, I assume already. There's definitely going to be a Hallmark COVID movie for sure. They crank that stuff out of a warehouse. It's easy. Yeah.
But yeah,
Owl and the Pussycat really got me very intrigued with the title, because I was like, what is Owl and a Pussycat? And then there's this poem. Did you look at the poem?
No, I meant to. I just ran out of time. Because I know that there is a poem. Is it like, does it closely relate to the film's storyline, or why
not even a little bit? It's really, I don't think it has anything to do with it. It was a cute story, and like I'm a songwriter. I do like stand-up comedy songs, and I've been playing music for years. But yeah, I like anything that has like a lot of rhyming and silliness, and this definitely has that. So it was curious because I got inspired by it because of the trailer. It's
Okay.
like not a fairy tale anymore. The Owl and the Pussycat.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so that's worth noting in the trivia, right? That obviously there's this famous poem called The Owl and the Pussycat.
Probably.
So other things, so as you mentioned, it's based on a play by Bill Manoff. And the screenplay was written by Buck Henry. He received a Writers Guild Award nomination for Best Comedy Adaptation that year. And then it was directed by Herbert Ross. This was his second feature. His first one was a much more dramatic film, which was Goodbye, Mr. Chip, starring Peter O'Toole, which came out the year before. And he had a long career. I want to say his films went into the 90s. I believe his last movie was Boys on the Side with Drew Barrymore and Whoopi Goldberg. That was his last feature film, Herbert Ross. So he was actively making films for almost 30 years. Yeah. So I think he might have started a little bit later in his career. He wasn't like a 22-year-old when he started.
Sure.
Yeah. But if you look up his credits, there's a lot of familiar titles, a lot of films that are considered classics today. This was Barbra Streisand's fourth feature film, and her second of two films in 1970. The first one was called On a Clear Day You Can See Forever, which was a musical directed by Vincent Minnelli. I think Owl and the Pussycat was more successful. Like, I think this movie, it showed her in a different light. She was kind of known as just, singing in all her movies.
Yeah.
Starting with Funny Girl, which is a great film, her debut, which she won an Oscar for. And then she did Hello, Dolly after that. So Owl and the Pussycat is kind of like her first real movie where it's not a period film. She's not singing. It's a different kind of look, a different kind of personality. So it shows Barbra Streisand in a new light, which I think was important for her career. She didn't want to just do
this movie really showcases Babs.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, which we'll get to, and I'll ask you about the performance and everything.
Please do.
The producer, Ray Stark, wanted Elizabeth Taylor for the Streisand role, but Elizabeth Taylor turned it down. So that would have been interesting, kind of later in Taylor's career to have done this role. I don't know. She might have been too old. I think she would have been too old in 1970.
Yeah, no, you don't want that. Nobody needs that.
And then Barbra Streisand wanted Sidney Poitier to play the Segal role.
Very cool.
But the powers that be didn't think audiences were ready for an interracial relationship in a major comedy film like this one. So that would have been interesting. I mean, I loved Segal in this movie. I thought he did great, but like that would have been a really unique film if it had been Sidney Poitier.
I think it may be a little bit more memorable.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, sometimes you never know with these things. They put two actors together, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And then the last thing is Streisand agreed to film a nude scene for the movie. But she said, I'm only going to do it if I have final cut. Like I want to say if you can keep it in or not. And later in editing, she decided she didn't want it. So the director cut it from the movie. But then I guess the stills got out in the late 70s and someone published it in a magazine. And she sued over that. Yeah. I was trying to figure out what scene that was. I mean, she gets in bed with him a lot in this movie, so I was like, which scene is that? But
she does.
It's probably the first one, right, where he comes back and she's like getting into bed. It's probably that one, but so that was kind of interesting. I mean, even in 1970, she was a pretty big star, right? So for her to even agree to a nude scene is actually kind of surprising to me. You'd think she'd be like, nope, like not happening.
I mean,
for a movie like this.
I don't know if we're ready to talk about her yet, but like, I really loved her in this movie, and like I've seen her in a lot of the later movies, and I guess I saw Yentl in Hebrew School, but like I never saw her in this light before when she was so young and pretty smoking hot, I would say.
This is probably the prettiest I've ever seen her in a film. Like she looks great in this movie.
She's gorgeous. Her body is slamming. She's great. And I like her attitude, man. I know a lot of girls who talk like this. And it was cool to see her kind of embody this like tough New York chick and really get into the nitty-gritty of it all. And I definitely dug it, man. I was down. I was
Yeah,
in.
so just in general, like what were your thoughts on the film as a whole? Did you think it worked as a film? Were there any,
Oh, absolutely.
you know?
This is a great movie. This is an exercise in how to tell a simple story correctly.
Mhm.
And something that I loved about it, we were talking about earlier that it was 90 minutes and I could fit it into my craziness over here.
Yeah, it's pretty
I
quick.
wish there was a whole section on Netflix called Tight 90 where like
Tight
you
90.
could go and like you could watch a 90-minute movie. It's got everything you want, everything you
Yeah.
need, and you'll be out and done and ready to rock and roll. You need that. And I think movies have gotten over bloated with time and story in a
Mhm.
lot of ways. You know, I could really tell it through my research watching the James Bond movies that they were making these James Bond movies. They were 2 hours. That was
Yeah.
it. Once you start getting into the Craigs, they get to 2 hours, 20 minutes, 2 hours, 30 minutes. That's a
Absolutely.
very long movie.
Mhm.
And you really have to be carrying a lot of weight and baggage and a lot of different segments. No, I like a
Yeah.
tight, direct film, and this one almost kind of felt like a Seinfeld kind of plot episode. You know, like it could
Yeah.
be it could be a plot where, you know, Jerry meets a stripper and and the stripper falls in love with his comedy. Like I could definitely see that playing out there. You know.
In like 22 minutes or 24 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's got a uniqueness and a quickness to it. We
Mhm.
don't need to see a lot of Barbra Streisand being a hooker.
No,
We don't
yeah.
need to. You don't need to look a lot at what George Segal does to know that he's a writer. And you're right there. I love visual storytelling, so the idea that they're capturing a lot of what's going on without having to exposit that information is always cool.
Yeah.
You know, you get into his house, you're like, oh, this dude's a crazy writer. He doesn't have a TV. He really takes it seriously.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't love it as much as you did.
Aw.
I had some qualms with this movie. I enjoyed the Seagal character, and I liked kind of the very fast pace of the dialogue. My issue with the movie from the beginning was Barbra Streisand's character of Doris is so shrill and so unlikable from the first scene that it was a little bit of a struggle for me to kind of get into their relationship. And it's when she gets softer in the second half, that's where I really settled into the movie and started to enjoy it. But she is like, she's beyond mean to him in the first 30, 40 minutes. Like she says some horrendous things to him, including
Yeah,
being,
she
I
would
mean,
be.
of its time, very homophobic in her very first scene. That I was kind of taken
Yeah.
aback by that. And it was hard for me to be like rooting for these characters to get together like in a typical romantic comedy. I'm like, get her out. Go find someone else, George. You know?
Yeah,
You know?
I know, right?
So that didn't bother you at all because it was kind of just her character and you just kind of just went with that from in the first half?
That's not to say I went with it. So looking at so not to bring up my shit, but looking at the James Bond stuff, like
Yeah.
they do some wackadoodle shit in those movies,
Yeah.
and they actually take some really crazy turns at different turns to be, you know, super racist in some, super sexist in others.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to take it for what it is. When you see her enter and she comes in and like goes on like the homophobic rant that she goes on, like they would never do that again in a movie now.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm sure she totally regrets that. And this is definitely something that, you know, there's a reason we didn't see this on TV. I'm pretty sure that scene is it.
That's probably
every other bit of this movie is totally kosher for TBS. You know what I mean? Like
absolutely.
even the nudity aspects of it, it's very tasteful. It's done really well. The sex scene is hilarious. But what I think the real where this movie doesn't age well and really shows its timeliness is her rant. And you know, it's not to say that I don't think that she's good and makes up for it after the fact. The main issue here is that you know, the writing and the way that they kind of tackle this beginning segment, you know, the way she kind of accosts him, you know, you know, it's the one thing that probably would do for a rewrite today. And I hope that
my last question about the movie is going to be like, if this were made in 2020, how would it be different? And I think we both know that scene would be a lot different today.
Yeah, it would be cut, you know. And it's interesting, you know. I guess you see, you know, shots of like 70s New York in different movies, and you can see, you know, the little scene in Forrest Gump. You know, Watchmen comes to mind, but that's the 80s, but it's still the same thing. And then you have, you know, these kind of depictions of the grossness and the seediness, and you know, the way the hookers back, even Taxi Driver, you know, like they're tough, they're raw, and this
Mhm.
one just is like, you know, the toughness isn't, it's exposited, it's not shown. So like
Mhm.
again, in, in congruency with what I like had she like shown how tough she was, or like, you know, was like ready to beat him up or like threatening him with a knife, like maybe we would have had a different take on it,
Yeah,
you
like
know.
if she like physically assaults him in the first scene or
Yeah, I would
something.
be like, we would, or does some cool like crazy fighting moves on him, like yeah, I'm down, that's cool.
I think what works really well is that you know some movies where you know it's like a romantic comedy and they're trying to you know they're kind of off and on throughout the movie. Like even though these are opposites, you really can tell like why they're attracted to each other, and that always feels really authentic. And as the movie goes on, you're not like, oh come on, this is forced. Like they don't really like you. Like he's like this kind of schlubby, like you
Yeah.
know, struggling writer, and you know, and she's like a totally different world than him. But you can kind of see that they're both so lonely, right? That they kind of are they're like desiring you know time with somebody else, and they kind of like come together at the same at the right time and have this kind of connection. By the second half of the movie, I thought that was really coming in once she kind of settled down. Like
Yeah, yeah,
once she
yeah.
like doesn't she like read like she talks about his writing. And the other scene, I as a you know, aspiring novelist myself, that part where she just destroys him as a writer, right? When she finds out he works as a clerk, and
Oh yeah.
she's walking to the elevator and just laying into him about how he's never gonna, you know, nothing's
Be a
ever gonna happen
writer.
with his right. And I was like, okay, bye, you can go.
Yeah,
You
you know,
know,
yeah, I feel you.
like
I've had
she's
somebody do that
pretty.
to me, but only it was naked in the shower, and that was way worse.
Yeah.
But you know, the main thing, um, I think where the movie kind of takes its turn is once the act break happens
Yeah.
and they get to that friend's house,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
Like the
Robert
movie,
Klein, great actor. Robert Klein plays
yeah,
the
great
friend.
comedian. He's the man.
Yeah.
Once they kind of get to her house, like the intrigue kind of sets in, and she kind of looks at him. She's like, "You want to fool around?" Like I was like, "Oh shit, yeah, definitely. Come at me, Babs." But the you know, their meeting is really crazy and
Mhm.
definitely feels just over energized and loud, and you know, for the comedy of its time, you know.
Yeah.
And comedy is something that is tough to age, you know, like
Hmm.
other 70s movie, I love Young Frankenstein. It's making fun of older movies, but
Yeah.
like that that comedy is timeless, you know, in certain ways. Like a lot of this kind
Hmm.
of jokes, the way that they're having the repartee, the New York accent. I don't Have you ever lived in New York or been around here for a little while? This
No,
movie
I've
feels
just
very New York
yeah.
to me.
Okay, yeah, I've just visited like 3 or 4 times for like a
Yeah, yeah,
weekend.
yeah. Uh, this movie feels very New York to me as a guy who was single a couple of times. Like when you would go out on dates, or like it's raining. Like New York in the rain is such a hassle of obstacle of situations. It's similar to LA in that, like, you know, everybody, like, what I love about LA when it rains is everybody's sad. Everybody's like, oh, it's raining. And then there's people who are thrilled,
Yeah.
right? You people who are like, oh my gosh, it's raining. It hasn't rained here in so long. I can't believe it's raining. In New York, the rain is an obstacle. All right. It is something in between you and the rest of the world. You know,
Yeah.
you are going out there, you have to wear rain shoes, you have to wear a rain coat. You got to make sure, if you're, you know, follically challenged like me, you got to get a hat. You know, there's different things you got to do. And I like that New York was a character in this movie a little
Mhm.
bit. And it definitely felt very informed by that.
Mhm.
And because the second act, when they show them the loneliness when they're not
Mhm.
together after the relationship has ended,
Yeah.
like I can think of 15 different people I was reminded of in my own personal life, where like the rain would come, or like you're like lonely and you don't have a significant other, and then you're like, oh shit, like, oh man, I miss that crazy person I used to talk to, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it definitely, that part definitely made me feel much more at home, and I think carries the story better
Yeah, I
forward.
knew about 20, 30 minutes. I was like, oh, this is probably based on a play since there's so much banter in within rooms. And so I enjoyed those
Yeah,
moments where we go outside. We get a little bit more of the New York atmosphere. We have that segment where they're not really speaking to each other that I thought was really well done. Like we see them at
great.
work, and you know, and they're still kind of thinking about each other. And one other kind of, this is like a super minor quibble. Like there's a couple parts in the movie that she's narrating. like where her
Yes,
character
you
is
hear
like
her omniscient narration. Yeah.
narrating, but it's what does it happen 2 or 3 times throughout the movie, and it's really both of their stories. So I was like, that's a curious choice. I wonder if that was
Oh.
just put in later to like clear up some things for the audience. That was the only thing that would make sense to me about that, because it's really both of their stories. Did you see this as her story over his? Because they're really in it about the same amount of time,
That's a great question. Well, I guess a lot of the rom-coms that we watch, I guess they're mostly taken, or I guess I would watch them from the point of view of the dude, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like Wedding Singer, like you're there thinking about Adam Sandler, Robbie Hart. He's my key into it, you know. But I think what they were trying to do with those voiceovers specifically is to showcase that I think she's a little bit more innocent than I think she lets on, because each time
Okay.
she's doing it, she doesn't kind of see the trap that she's kind of walking herself into. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like she saw the guy in the limo, like, oh, like this is just a way to get home. Like he's some rich guy, like no big deal. But like, of course, like he's the guy who ultimately gets her thrown out. So he was probably not so great. Like she could, if she had not had that interaction, she wouldn't have gotten caught by Segal and then wouldn't have been thrown out. And then the second dude, the guy in the dress shop, like he had a family, he was a dick. Like she ultimately, I don't think, did have sex with him, and she kind of like took off and ran away. And I think it kind of shows her like weak judgment and gives her redeeming innocence to the audience, right? Like it kind of shows her that she's not this like crazy horny
I think it was really important that she be redeemed in the second half of this movie, because she
Oh
is
yeah.
so over the top mean to him in the first few scenes. I was like,
Yes.
okay, so I mean, it's a good thing you're hot, Barbra Streisand, because otherwise I think he'd be like, okay, you're out of here.
But he also wants that too, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's something that I think, I guess as writers, like I kind of relate to a little bit too. Like, as much as we do want somebody to like enjoy our work and like be appreciative of what we do, I speak myself. I have a wife. You want your partner to like or be, appreciate the
Supportive,
things that
yeah.
you do, support. We also, at that same time, if I'm really being honest, I want somebody to be like, you could be doing better, or like you've used this before, or like why are you doing this again? Like I kind of appreciate that, and I think he kind of showed a little bit of his colors there too, and that he did too. He always felt like he's writing for his audience and like not really caring, and as soon as she kind of knows that and like sees his kind of weird wording, like I don't know how the sun spits at people either, I completely agree with her. He's like, oh well, I'm doing this, and then we find out he's a book clerk, and then we find out
Yeah.
he's this like nebbishy dude.
Yeah. Any other scenes that you? So there were a couple scenes I thought were really funny. I love the scene where he's trying to scare her out of the hiccups, and
Yes.
the way that ends with the whole like floor of the apartment building, everybody busting into the like that scene. That was probably the funniest scene in the movie, I thought.
Yeah, definitely. I like those kind of beats. It definitely felt like very SNL sketchy kind of, you know what I mean?
Little
like,
bit SNL.
like they're like, okay, like we're gonna be in a pile on the floor and making noise with the tape, and everyone's gonna come and see us, and scene. Yeah. I like that. I think my one of my favorite scenes is actually when he goes to his fiance's house. And we won't say what happens, but ultimately they go to this really nice brownstone looking kind of building in New York City, and they're walking around, and presumably he's had access to this either the whole time or recently, right? And kind of like walking around, and like even like he knows like he doesn't really belong there. And I kind of appreciated the way that they're both kind of there together, and are kind of this new unit in this thing that he's alien to. I kind of appreciated that scene on a little bit of a level. I dug it, actually.
Okay, yeah, that was a really great scene too. I forgot to write that part down. Yeah, that one definitely stood out.
It was cool, and it definitely like it gave it a new context. It showed kind of his cards, like what's at stake for him. We've been kind of only hearing about what's at stake for Doris, and we ultimately find out not very much.
Yeah, I mean, it's something kind of weird to ask for in romantic comedies, but I was wondering as I watched this movie, is there enough at stake in this movie? You know,
Great question.
because sometimes in better romantic comedies, like there's a little bit more, like there's some kind of engine kind of chugging the story. You know, there's usually something a little bit more. Not to say like, you know, the classic cliche of like, you know, one of them is leaving to move to Paris at the end, you know, and they've got 3 days, and then they're running down, you know, running to the airport with 10 minutes to spare. I didn't really want that, especially in this movie, but there was a few points where I'm like, what is the motivation? What's at stake here for these two characters? What am I really like, you know, kind of grasping for here? And I wasn't always able to answer that question in this movie.
Well, to me, it kind of feels like, you know, after the, you know, the summer of love, and you kind of have, you know, the sexual revolution and kind of things kind of changed, right? You have coming into the 70s.
Yeah.
This very much feels like, you know, kind of choosing your own way and kind of autonomy. You know what I mean? Like the idea that, and also what's that idea? Self-determination.
Yeah. Okay.
That like they're going to decide what they're going to do for themselves. Like it's not going to be dictated by their job or their parents or their family. Like they're going to make that. He's going to be a writer. She's going to, you know, be an actress. She's going to be in the movies. Like, and it doesn't really matter if those two things are coming together. What matters is they're together and they're going to support each other to make that happen. Like a kind of a conscious coupling, you know, a new agey kind of way to look at romance. And it could be the fact that, you know, they're not super compatible in the first sense, because we see how again volatile they are, but
volatile to be.
but ultimately, like instead of like marrying for a family or for money, or, you know, because somebody's a piano player or whatever, like they ultimately make the decision to be together because they want to be together with each other, you know. And that felt very, you know, kind of like it felt modern and self-deterministic, and also like that these characters are in their 30s, you know what I mean? Like they're not
20. Yeah.
They're not 20. They're not, you know, at a concert someplace. They don't have their whole lives ahead of them. Like they've been through a little bit of the world. They've seen a little bit of some shit. And now what are we going to do? And that's part of it. I think that's why I think the love story works.
Yeah, I mean that last scene. We won't give away exactly what happens at the end, but they're almost like different people at the end. I mean,
they've grown.
They've really grown and evolved in 90 minutes. Like they do not really resemble the crazy people we met in the first 10 minutes. You know.
No, definitely, and you know, it's nice to show growth that isn't, you know, like I got sober and changed my life around and lost a whole bunch of weight. Like no, like I was, you know, thinking about this other thought. It wasn't a good thought or bringing me happiness. I'm going to go on to a better thought that I think is better. And like that change is enough, right? Normalize changing your mind. You know what I mean? Like it's a really powerful idea. And I think in a lot of the movies today, you know, you'll see that third act change come, you know, I think specifically about like 40-Year-Old Virgin, you know, where he's like selling his toys and, trying to like really go through this pictorialized growth spurt, not real. Like is he really growing because he's selling the toys? No, I would say this movie, George Segal, like the acting that they do, it's really not even that highly technical. There's nothing too crazy going on, but like in the scenes where they're just together, like you feel them together, and the scenes where they're angry at each other, you feel that animus, you feel that tension of this dude who really wants to go to sleep and this bitch who cannot go to bed. Right? Like I've been there, you know, or like when you have a partner over that first night or a different time and like you just don't go to sleep because somebody's wired, you know, like I've been there. And it definitely, the smaller moments, the smaller ingredients do add up to the sum of the parts. I'm sorry to run roughshod over your podcast and just talk.
Oh no, this is like, I'm interested in what you have to say about it, right? I know what I have to say about it, right? So I love hearing your thoughts. You've had you know, I usually ask the guests about theme. You've already kind of touched on the theme of the film, and you've touched on 2 or 3, I think, thematic elements of the movie, and you know, kind of how these characters are dealing with each other and what they want. And
well, that really comes to the basic idea that like movies are bigger than just a movie. You know what I mean? That like everything in a movie is meant to be there. We know that from the directors, you know what I mean? And that's something that there's no coincidences. You know, when you're watching this, it's happening as they wanted you to see it. And that's always so cool. I think a lot about Jim Henson and the way that he was like, I'm only wanting you to see it from where the camera sees it and where you're going to enjoy it. Like, you don't need to see it any other way, which is so contradictory to how we deal with movies now, where we're getting so much behind the scenes stuff even before the movie comes out. And they have to drive that interest. They have to keep stoking the fire. Like, I don't know if you could make a movie this simple today that would have the kind of hook that this movie does. And I think it would be super cool to see it redone as a play, do it modern as a play again. It would so totally work.
That would be cool. I mean, I don't really know a whole lot about the play, if it's been resurrected at all in these last 50 years, but yeah, that
I saw a couple of clips on YouTube, but nothing too crazy.
Okay. All right, so cool. That takes us to performances. We talked a little bit about them. Let's talk about Streisand first. So why do you think that this was such kind of a breakthrough for her as a performer in film? This is something different that she hadn't done before.
Definitely. To me, this feels like I think a lot of young actresses go out for different roles to kind of show the diversity in their stuff. Think about someone like Jennifer Lawrence, right? She was doing Hunger Games, and then she did that breakout in Silver Linings
Playbook, yeah.
Where she's like, exactly, and she's super organic, she's super real, and you're experiencing all of that really fully realized character. It felt very similar to me, the what Streisand was doing here, which is to say, like, you see me do Funny Girl, I can sing, I'm gonna do other stuff later, but right now, like, I gotta play this like tough chick from New York who has a heart of gold, and she does a really great job with that. She take the writing that she has to deliver with the slurs and the stuff, it's unfortunate, and she definitely says it like somebody who knew how to say the words in real life, so that kind of sucks even more.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think we can say that you take out that first 10 minutes of that movie, like the rest of this film plays pretty perfectly. You can
I mean, you get the sense with both of them, really, like that they've been doing this kind of screwball fast comedy from like the 1930s kind of style dialogue for a long time, and really I think she was funny on screen a little bit in the first three films she was in, but this was like her first real comedy.
And exactly,
being her first one, she's really on it, right? I mean, she's all throughout, like, she really commits to that character, and she's especially in the second half when they have a little bit more chemistry together and are not fighting all that.
And she's got great she's got great timing. She's got great timing, and really does hit the jokes that she gets to say out of the park. She gets to do some really funny reaction shots, I think, and does good act outs. You believe it when she sits on the couch and she's like sitting up, like all relaxed, and George Segal's like, "What are you doing? Are you gonna sleep that way?" And she's like, "Yeah, I slept this way when I watched the TV."
Oh yeah.
I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Is that the part where he's trying to go to sleep and she's just she's like watching TV, and he's like, "I've been up since 4 a.m. yesterday."
Oh yeah. But George Segal is awesome in this movie.
I love that actor. He's great in this.
Dude, he's great, and he's bringing a lot to it. Emoting really well in a lot of his scenes. It's interesting to see him play kind of like not so masculine of a dude, but like still have a lot of masculinity in all of his shots. Like when he's like when he takes the towel away from himself in the scene where she's shining the light at him, and he's just like standing there.
He gets naked and she laughs hysterically.
Oh, I've had that happen to me too. He's so believable. And then when you get, again, my other, one of my favorite parts is when he gets to the fiance's house and they're walking around, and like you could see him just like mulling this over. What have I done? What am I doing? What's happening? And that felt very real. It also felt like subdued in the way that you don't need to communicate, well, I met her when I was in college and we did this and we did that, like he's just very light about it, nonchalant, and you totally get the whole story.
Is it Segal or Segal? I should have looked that up. I thought it was Segal, but maybe it is Segal. I'm thinking maybe you're right.
I don't know. I know Jews.
We'll call him George.
Yeah, George. It doesn't have the phonetic spelling here on the I am Debizzle.
I'm
But
like,
yeah,
is it pronounced like Steven Seagal? I'm like, maybe not. Maybe it is Seagal. I don't know.
no, I think this guy is. I think this guy is what I would call one of the members of the tribe. So I think it's Seagal, but
It's
I
Seagal.
could be
Okay.
wrong.
Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm not 100% that. So I'll call him George. But he. So he's also a great dramatic actor, and he brings
Yep.
that that background to this movie, and he just like he does such a great job of making this guy real, of having moments that you really feel for him. It feels very authentic to his character, but also leaning into the comedy too. Like, I don't think, I haven't seen everything he's done in the early few years of his career, but I think he was making more dramas than comedies. And so
Really?
I think, yeah, like his like he's in The Longest Day. He's in like a war film, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf,
Oh
and
yeah.
I watched the other earlier this year. I watched his other 1970 film called Loving, which is this really serious, kind of depressing movie about divorce, and that he stars in. Yeah, he's we think of him, like, I am a huge fan of the Goldbergs. I don't know if you've seen that show.
I have seen the show.
But
Yes.
he's the grandfather in that, and he is hilarious in that show.
Yeah, he's
And
great.
so I think of him as a comedian, kind of comedy actor. But when you go back and look at some of his earlier work, he was doing some drama as well. But he really, like, he has such a great mix of like the comedy and the drama in this character to make him feel like a real person. He's never taking it too far in the comedy where it feels like a caricature of a writer, which could, he could have overplayed that, right? This kind of like,
Oh, for sure. He could have made him look like Clark
writer.
Kent.
It could have had the Rick Moranis look in Ghostbusters. He could have really gone, but no, I mean, he's a handsome guy, and glasses and all. Like, it doesn't, he's a real guy in this, and I think we need an actor like him in this movie for Streisand's character of Doris to really kind of find some affection for him in the second half and recognize that this is a really great person. I might want to take take a chance with this one.
Well, you need comedy in a team. You always have the loud person and the straight man. Abbott and Costello. Going back all the way back to them, Laurel and Hardy. Like, you always got to have one hilarious loud person and then one serious person who will offset the comedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he definitely plays the straight man here perfectly, in that he's like, he's not the one coming out with all the quips, like, and you see him try to, right? Like, almost his loquaciousness becomes his Achilles heel, because she doesn't understand what the fuck he's trying to say to her. You know what I mean? So his role as being like, the comedy wall for Barbra Streisand to bounce off of definitely rocks and rolls. Like, for me, I think my first entry with George Segal, I'm sorry to say, is Entourage.
Oh, right.
He
was
plays
on
Murray,
Entourage.
and he plays Eric's boss for a couple of seasons before he buys him out. And he's super memorable in that. I also know him a little bit from the Goldbergs too. But yeah, not somebody I had seen a ton of his work before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy to me that the guy who goes on to play the dude in Entourage is this guy at this point. Because he plays no connection. I got to go back and watch Larry Sanders' show. So that would definitely be cool, because it looks like he plays himself on the Larry Sanders show.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, I saw Larry Sanders show a while back. I can't remember George Segal being on it, but yeah, he's kind of popped up here and there on everything, right? As I said before, he's been acting for 60 years. His first film came out in 1961, so he's been around a long time, and he's still acting. He's still doing Goldbergs. He's still around, so that's pretty cool.
Thank God for that generation.
Yeah, Streisand. I mean, she basically stopped making films around like 91. Like every 5 to 6 years we'd maybe get something. Her last directorial film was The Mirror Has Two Faces in 1996, and then the only films she's done since that, she did Meet the Fockers, and then made a cameo in the third one, which was awful, and then The Guilt Trip with she did The Guilt Trip in 2012, I want to say.
I remember.
Which I believe was her last film appearance. That was 8 years ago. So they've been talking about, she's been wanting to do a like an adaptation of the musical Gypsy for like 20 years. And it almost happened, I want to say, like 6 years ago, but then it fell through. And so I don't know if we'll ever see her in a movie again. But yeah, George is still a little bit more active in the industry in terms of his acting.
It looks like she's due to appear in or she may have already appeared in Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Oh, was she in that show? I didn't. I haven't seen the third season. She might have
You know
done
what?
like a maybe like a
No, no,
voice
no, no.
cameo
I'm
or something.
sorry. Nope, she was not. It's a soundtrack credit. I'm
Oh, okay,
sorry.
yeah. She's got a lot of soundtrack credits that pops up every year. She did like 5 seconds on Modern Family. Like she actually did like a little voice cameo on that show, and I was like,
What?
oh, was that really her? And I looked it up, and it was. I was like, okay, she probably just phoned it in right on a Sunday morning. Like, okay,
Yeah.
you get 10 minutes of my time, and then I'm done. But yeah, so yeah, these two, I want to say I looked up that he appeared in another film she directed. It might have been The Mirror Has Two Faces. But for the most part, right, this was like their one big collaboration together. And yeah, I think especially in the second half, like they really have a lot of chemistry and kind of as much as intrigued I am as what Sidney Poitier would have done in this film with
No,
her would have been really unique and interesting. Would have to have seen them together in a romantic comedy. I still think that she and George make a really good pair.
they're a great couple. They make their dynamic. It's spicy. It's very funny and it's super watchable. You wanna see what happens next. I'd watch a sequel. How
Yeah.
crazy are their kids gonna be? That'd be fun. Whole TV show.
meet the owls and the little pussycat would be great. Yeah, maybe one day when they're
Maybe
like
one
really
day.
old. Real quick about the director, any stamp that he put on this movie that you noticed? Was there any point in the movie where you were like, oh, this is the director kind of doing his thing, or did he kind of just stay out of this one and just let the story play out?
That's a tough call. I want to say that this guy definitely brought some interesting shots to the way you would stage a play.
Yep.
That
Mhm.
when you are in that tiny apartment in the beginning of the movie, you definitely feel how small it is. You feel, as the tension escalates between them at different points, especially after she breaks in,
Mhm.
it really amps it up. And, he could have just sat the camera down and let them just act on a stage or make it seem less dynamic. But I think he
Yeah.
does a really good job of making subtle movements and
Mhm.
also doing a couple of different angles to
Mhm.
make you feel claustrophobic as well. Probably
Mhm.
the best part of the directorially is probably the beginning, probably for the director, I would say. What
Okay,
about you?
like the way the movie opens and everything. Yeah, I mean, the note I made, it's harder in comedies, especially comedies like based on a play. There's only so much you can do with the camera. There's only so much you can do.
Totally.
And looking at his credits, right? He's done comedies, he's done musicals, he's done dramas. So I think he's one of those directors who goes where the story kind of compels him. He's not one of those. He's not like a Hitchcock where you're gonna see kind of like his paintbrush on the screen in every movie. I think he kind of goes where the story takes him. And in this film, like I didn't really see in any major way the mark of a director. It seemed like he was just really focusing on telling the story the best way he can, making it not too claustrophobic, right, throughout the movie, which can
No,
happen.
definitely.
Which can happen in films based on plays, especially when they're set in like a room for many, many minutes on end. I just think, I just think he did a great job with the material that was given to him. But yeah, he kind of stays out of it when it comes to like cinematography. We get some nice shots in New York, as you mentioned before, and seeing them in their workspaces. And there's a nice pacing to this movie. It's never super rushed. I thought the editing was really well done, and all the
I,
production design and costume design really well done.
I agree with you. I love when a movie just like it comes together, it feels effortless, and it definitely inhabits a certain timelessness of vintage New York City. Right before it became kind of decrepit and nasty, like this kind of still has a little bit of a Rear Window vibe to it in some ways, where you're
Yeah.
looking around the city and the city takes on a life of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. My last question about the movie is I always like to end when we're talking about our featured film, like, looking at it through a 2020 lens. We've talked about it obviously with this one a little bit, like, how is it dated, which we've talked about with some of that early material. But
Yeah.
if they were to remake this in 2020, how would it be different? Style, like in terms of its style, in terms of kind of how would it be kind of the same outside of those opening 10-15 minutes that would be cut or changed? Would it kind of play out the same in 2020, or would there be a more modern aesthetic to it that would make kind of take it in a new direction? Any idea how that would be different?
Well, I think the pinnacle of the 60s and 70s was really films and TV, right? That's how people really experienced media.
Yeah.
I think today it's definitely more so through our phones now. So if they were going to rewrite this, you'd have Barbra Streisand's character remain pretty much the same, but instead of being an actress, she wants to be an Instagram influencer on TikTok.
Yeah.
And then
their jobs would be a little different.
Yeah, and then you'd have Segal's character would be kind of like us, maybe more of the podcaster, maybe more of the blogger,
He'd be a blogger for sure,
or even more of like a even a classic writer, and kind of eschewing the way that the way content is produced just to be content. You know what I mean? Like I could definitely see a writer getting to play and feeling resentful of like going to school and learning all this stuff to be a writer and traveling, and then you come back and you lose to some 22-year-old who's just producing content for Gothamist or LAist, and this is not the kind of writing he was expecting to do, but it's this is what gets the eyeballs, and I think it would be a lot like that, and I think it would be more about leaving behind the phones to have a real interaction. That there is a lot of benefit to sitting and looking at someone and having a discussion, and I think that's something that movie could really play into, because there's a lot of really great beats where they're silent and they're supposed to just be on opposite sides of the room, and just now a rewrite would be they're on their phones. You know what I mean? Like she's trying to take better selfies and he's trying to look up who she is and how you get the hold of the authorities. I think this movie is definitely due for a remake. It could really work.
Yeah, phones and social media and apps like that has made the romantic comedy trickier now, right? You can't really tell a classic romantic comedy now because you have to deal with all of the technology that's come into our world in the last 10 plus years.
We've entangled the technology into the relationships, for utility and a convenience, and in the transaction, you lose the directness of people. Do you ever really break? When I was dating, did you break up with somebody or did you just ghost them? There's a lot of different stuff nowadays, and we've kind of lost the ability. I've been thinking about this a lot with the election and everything coming up, that especially with the quarantine, that even in before times, if you wanted to get your emotions out or pent up feelings, you go to a concert, go to a movie, you go to a comedy club, you go to a poetry reading, go to a cafe, you go all these different places. And it's okay to express emotions, have a conversation, laugh at something, express, your emotions through yelling it back at a concert. Now we don't do that. Now, anytime you want to be in a conversation with somebody, it's very, politically correct, and we're all, kind of watching what we say. And then we all have these private $1,000 hand computers for our internal rage, which is a bizarre concept, we've lost the ability to get mad at each other in real life, and we traded it for yelling at people that we don't know in cyberspace.
It's easier to just yell at people on the phone, on the on Twitter and stuff.
You lose that. So I think this movie kind of shows them, you lose that in the facelessness of New York City. You're oh, well, there's this girl, she's definitely a hooker, we could see that, but I don't have any empathy for her. And then you walk down, you see some nebbishy looking dude, you're oh, that guy's probably a writer we'll never hear from. Nobody cares about him.
No, I agree with everything you said. I think in a new version, I think the leads would be younger. I was watching this thinking, I think if they made this today, they would pick 2 actors in the early 20s, right? They would change the jobs. They'd get younger actors. They'd probably make it move a little bit quicker. There maybe be a little bit more comical situations, and they'd probably tone down her at the beginning, right? when she busts into his apartment.
I kind of disagree. I would actually age them up 10 years.
I would age them up.
I would make them 40.
I think you could age them up. I just think, depending on who was involved with the project, I feel like
Oh, right. If we
they
have
would
to get
probably go
money and
younger.
make this commercially viable.
Yeah, make it commercially viable. No, I agree. I agree with you. If they did it again, I would want to see them older. Like I think that because I think that's what made this movie interesting was that they weren't 20, that they were a little bit older, and they'd had these jobs. They're struggling. You don't really buy the struggling writer when he's 20. It's like
no.
you're not,
what are you struggling with?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, hopefully if they were to do it again, they would age them up for sure. All right, so that takes us to our final two segments. The first one is called the Divine Double Feature. This one is when we pick a more contemporary film that you think would make a really cool double feature with Al and the Pussycat. So what would be your second film that our listeners would want to check out?
I'm sure it's going to be viewed as cheese as hell, but I think a great double feature with this would be Eternal Sunshine. Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Absolutely. I have a kind of a similar choice too. That's a great one, Eternal Sunshine. Why do you think that would go well with Al and the Pussycat?
Because it's a similar but more dramatic realization of the same concept, that you have like this kind of internalized nebbishy dude who wants to be an extrovert, and you have this extroverted female lead character who is brash and abrasive but is also imaginative and can be very caring, and you kind of watch them break up, whereas in the other movie you watch them kind of get together. And I love the way that they shoot a breakup in like the most loving relationship movie ever, and you really appreciate kind of all the aspects of what it's like to have a non, eternally committed relationship, that there's a beginning, middle, and an end to it, that it, you examine how somebody comes into your life, what happens during that time, and why you ultimately didn't stay with them, and that movie kind of takes a lot of the themes from this one and just goes in a different direction.
Okay, yeah, that's a great choice and a great movie. Any chance I have to watch Eternal Sunshine, it's just such a beautiful film. Still to this day, think it might be Jim Carrey's best work on film, and
110%.
Wish he had been nominated for that one because he never got an Oscar nomination. I'm not sure he ever will, but that one was really special.
I agree.
Yeah, my choice would be. Did you see Ruby Sparks or heard of it?
No.
I want to say it came out in 2015. It's a romantic comedy about a young writer. They're in their 20s, and basically, like, he creates a character on the page that comes to life. And she's played by Zoe Kazan.
Yes, I remember the trailer for this movie.
It's like this really cute film. I remember, it didn't make my top 10 of that year, but it made the second 10. It was really, really, really fun. I think it'd be it's also kind of got that screwball comedy aspect of Al and the Pussycat, and it's also about a writer. So I thought that would be kind of like a neat film to see. So what would that have been, like 45 years after Al and the Pussycat, to kind of see the evolution of the romantic comedy, a film from the 70s, a film from the 2010s, romantic comedy about a writer, and just to kind of see the different aesthetics by the directors and everything. Might be kind of a fun choice to watch directly after Al and the Pussycat. So it's a really
solid
fun movie. Yeah, I like that one a lot.
Choice.
I've only seen it twice. I want to go back and watch it. It's really fun.
That's Michael Cera, right?
Not Michael Cera. I'm blanking on his name. The actor from Paul Dano.
Oh, yes.
From Little Miss Sunshine and There Will Be Blood. He plays the lead in that. Yeah,
he's the man.
Yeah, he's a fun actor too. In our final segment, Beyond the Flick, we pick an actor or a genre or a director affiliated with the movie, and just kind of pick our favorite films of his or hers. And so yeah, I wanted to go with George on this movie, since I'm not sure I'll talk about him too much in the rest of the 70s podcast, at least. What other films have you seen by him, and what have we liked him in?
Well, like I said, not too much, unfortunately, but I think for me, my most memorable thing would be for like when he guests on Entourage.
Yeah. Was he in the movie? Was he in the movie too, or just the show?
No, just in the show.
Okay.
He's in The Cable Guy for a very short stint.
I forgot about that. He's in The Cable Guy. Yeah.
One of the greats. But yeah, I'm not, I never saw like Look Who's Talking Now. That wasn't really my thing.
Look Who's Talking Now. Oh my God.
Yeah, I know that he's in some great movies. I have not seen a ton of them. I should have taken a look at maybe a film he made.
So this would be your number one choice.
This would definitely be my number one choice.
Yeah.
Go see his seminal work in Al and the Pussycat.
Yeah. So yeah, he's in some 70s films. He's in one called A Touch of Class from 1973 that I have not seen, but I think it got some Oscar nominations or might have had even wins. And that one I'm looking forward to checking out in 3 years when we look at the year of 1973. So the three films of his that I've seen that I really enjoy, the first one is Loving, which I mentioned before, which also came out in 1970. It's a really powerful story of divorce that co-stars Eva Marie Saint from On the Waterfront and North by Northwest, and
Cool.
they play a couple getting a divorce. And it's kind of a quiet film, but really well acted, really well done. I think it was one of those that kind of came and went, but it's really, it's worth a look if you're interested in those two actors. My second favorite would be Look Who's Talking, the first one. Not Now. Now is the one with the talking dogs. That one's terrible. But the very first one of the three is great. Kirstie Alley and John Travolta, their careers were kind of dipping, and then that movie kind of brought them back. And George plays like I can't remember if it's been a while if he's Kirstie Alley's husband or ex-husband, but like they've had a relationship, and he's kind of the antagonist in the movie, and he's really funny. And Look Who's Talking.
Cool.
So I really enjoyed that. Bruce Willis as the talking baby.
Oh, I know.
It's very 80s. It's a very 80s comedy, but it's fun. I enjoyed it when I was younger. And then my easily, no question, the best film he's been in of the ones I've seen is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf from 1966. Have you seen that movie?
No, I have not.
You haven't seen that? Oh my gosh.
It's classic. I know.
It's a classic, absolutely riveting movie. And it could have been ruined with, Elizabeth Taylor playing this older, frumpy wife of an academic. But it's probably her best performance on film. Richard Burton is who she was with in real life, plays her husband in the movie, and it's maybe his best performance. And just, it's 2 hours plus, and the dialogue is just so sharp, so funny, and it goes in directions you don't expect. And George, it was his only Oscar nomination. He got a supporting actor nomination for that film.
That's awesome.
He's great in it. I think all four of the actors in that film were nominated, and two of them won. I think the two women won. He's great in it. It's one of his earlier films, black and white. The first film by director Mike Nichols, who would go on to have a really outstanding career. His first two films back to back were Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and The Graduate.
Yeah, huge, man. Wow.
If you're interested in classic films, I'd highly recommend to you and all our listeners to check out Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It's one of my favorite films. It's really great.
I'll throw that right on the docket right now, man. That sounds great.
Yeah. So yeah, that takes us to the end here. Thank you again, AJ. This has been so much fun. You promoted your podcast a little bit at the beginning, but if you want to talk about it anymore now, or let the listeners know, where can they find you online and listen to your stuff? And now's the time to
definitely.
tell us.
Please. Thank you so much for having me, Brian. So you can find the podcast on Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever have you. Long Lost Heroes podcast.
Okay.
If you're interested in hearing a little bit more from me of what I do that's not podcast related, go to my YouTube channel. You can find it, AJS11089. You'll see AJ Sherman Musical Comedy. It has some of my more recent songs and performances up there. And definitely check out my Instagram. This is where I post about everything that I do creatively, and that's AJ Don't. AJDONT. As in AJ Don't.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely want to check it out. And I'm going to check out your podcast. It sounds fantastic. I would love to take a listen.
It's fun. We just wrapped up covering all of James Bond. We went in a very cockamamie order, and it was a super long endeavor to go on. And, at times during the Roger Moore era, it just felt like we were dragging on forever.
View to a Kill, Octopussy.
Oh my God, those movies are rough. Especially when Roger Moore looks like 80,000 years old in the later movies. But enough on that. Those are about to wrap up, and we're going to be releasing new episodes on The Mandalorian. Starting this Friday, October 30th, whenever this podcast comes out. Tune in and find us there.
Yeah, this podcast is airing on Friday, November 6th. So this will actually be after The Mandalorian coming out and the election.
Oh,
so this will be after after the election on November 6th.
I hope it's in a good place.
Yeah, we're recording this about 2 weeks before, but we'll see how everything turns out. Thank you again, AJ. Thanks to all of you for listening. Please give the podcast a 5-star rating and a review, and please tell your friends and family about us. You can find Film at 50 online at filmat50.com. You can find us on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can email us at 50yearsagoinfilm@gmail.com. There's also a Patreon with the podcast. We have at least 2 new episodes a month, exclusive only to our Patreon subscribers. So check that out and support the podcast. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.